I mean, what's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team.
I would be very careful about slinging stone.
Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
That sends you out on the right note. PFF sucks. Have a great day, everybody.
Wow. Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast, Friday, February the 2nd, just a week or so away from the big game, the Super Bowl. We can actually say it because we're not selling anything. We're not trying to hawk you, Doritos while we're saying it. So the Super Bowl is about a week away. We are going to cover that. We're going to preview the Super Bowl on Monday's show. Myself and Steve, we're going to preview it before we head out to Vegas for the week of Super Bowl festivities and shows. So you'll have a week to digest it all. We'll have the boo-boo breakdown later on this show where Vic is going to run through the injuries relevant to the big game. But myself and Brad are going to talk a little free agency and some NFL news. So Dan Quinn being hired by the Washington Commanders, and then Brad's free agency list. How's it going, Brad?
Going fantastic. I actually just clicked the button on Zoom settings to adjust for low light, which I think, I don't know if you can see it coming through, but I probably should have done that a year and a half ago. But
Beautiful
anyway, everything's going well.
Beautiful and shiny. I clicked a button recently that said something like, it was like automatic touch up or something. It takes away all your blemishes. It youths me by like 10 years, It takes away the wrinkles.
Yeah, you have a full head of hair that I'm seeing through the feedback.
No, I haven't clicked it on this one. This one's just old ass me. But previously you can also sort of adjust a slider for just how hardcore it wants to smooth out all the imperfections and blemishes. You can get you look like a CGI character when you do that. It's pretty impressive. Anyway, we're going to get into the Dan Quinn thing. That's the thing that we want to hit first up top. But this podcast is brought to you by the good people at Fabric by Gerber Life. If you have a family, you need to get term life insurance to protect them. It's one of the smartest financial decisions you can make, and this new year is the perfect time to get it done so you can focus on whatever else the year has in store for you. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get a high-quality, surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy in less than 10 minutes. Fabric has flexible policies that fit your family and your budget with quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Get your personalized quote in minutes and then apply when it's convenient for you. It's all online and on your schedule. You could go from start to covered in less than 10 minutes with no health exam required. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in minutes at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. MEET fabric.com/PFFNFL. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, Brad. The Washington Commanders hired Dan Quinn as their new head coach, obviously former defense coordinator of division rival Dallas Cowboys. I guess the first thing I want to touch on here is, from the outside, it would be very easy to read this as a fifth choice type of hiring. We wanted all these other guys and that didn't work, so now we're going to Dan Quinn. Do you have any sense as to whether that was the reality or actually how it went down, that they struck out with Ben Johnson, anybody else they wanted, and Dan Quinn is like, all right, I guess he's okay?
It does seem like Ben Johnson was their top target, and they were obviously, I think, would have hired him if he had the interest, if maybe his contract demands were more in line with the standard of the rest of the coaching market. I'll say this. The thing we always hear about Dan Quinn is how he can build out a great staff. People want to work for him. He can get offensive coaches to come work with him, give them a lot of power. Of course, went to a Super Bowl with, maybe because of, Kyle Shanahan with the Atlanta Falcons. So I will say this. I think you and I have talked about this. I'm obsessed with the idea now of these coordinators that don't want to go elsewhere. Steve Spagnuolo in Kansas City, insert names here. There's a report that came out from Pro Football Talk about Chip Kelly and maybe coming. I know some people might say, oh, his NFL tenure was terrible. I feel like we've retconned that. He took over a 4-12 Andy Reid coached football team and went 10-6 2 years in a row. Now, did he run this kind of weird program with a lot of nutritional stuff, and he gassed out his defense and because they ran so up tempo and kind of was trying to be too college? Yeah, maybe. But the thought process to me there is, you bring in a good offensive coach that I don't think wants to go back to the college ranks. I don't think is going to get an NFL head coaching job again. So maybe the thought process is this is at least above average to good offensive mind, and he's not going to leave for the rookie contract of this quarterback. So underwhelming, I think it's fair to say. Quinn's defense, obviously, the last game we saw him play, they got absolutely demolished by the Green Bay Packers. They had a terrible game plan coming in, just playing a bunch of 220-pound linebackers against 12 personnel at Green Bay, and just got killed. But I do think I want to wait to see how the full staff builds out. It does raise the floor, all those things. It's just underwhelming because I thought you could have tried to shoot the moon here, get an offensive mind, pair him with the number 2 overall pick quarterback, and see what you have.
It is. I mean, it's kind of going against the grain, if nothing else, in terms of the trend right now to get the new young name, the head coach, and everyone else is sort of staying away from the retreads. Like Mike Vrabel didn't get a coaching job this time around. Bill Belichick couldn't get a coaching job this time around. Okay, those are maybe more complicated by the level of control they want and all those kinds of things. Pete Carroll as well. But the league has not jumped back into bed with guys that have sort of given it a shot, haven't had their success. Have sort of failed the first time around, I guess, quote unquote, and then gone and rebuilt their reputation as a coordinator somewhere else. They're going for the next young guy, and instead the commander is with, remember, this new owner, this guy who hasn't done it before. This is his sort of first cycle doing all this kind of stuff, have gone with Dan Quinn from a division rival. So it's an interesting hiring if just because it's going in the other direction to everybody else at the moment.
For sure. And I think that's also where you have Mike Macdonald in your backyard. Obviously, he's in Baltimore. You're in Washington. If you were going to go defense and maybe struck out on some of the offensive minds you wanted, and again, maybe he wanted to go to Seattle. We don't really know the full dynamic, but then go full court press on that. Go after the best defensive play caller probably in football this year. Maybe against Steve Spagnuolo could have an argument there, but do that. And I know the staff is always a huge part. I think that may be scaring some folks with Macdonald, but it sounds like Ryan Grubb, who was the Washington Huskies OC this past year. Yes, that offense isn't really an NFL offense, but I think he's shown he can build an offense around the talent that they have, probably help develop a lot of the talent that they have. I mean, 3 legit top 100 pick receivers probably. Of course, Michael Penix's career resurgence. So that would be an exciting hire to me if he goes back to Seattle, which it sounds like he might. But yeah, it is against the grain. We had 5 defensive head coaches get jobs this year out of the 8 openings. So, as much as people talk about the whole ideal outcome being going offense, obviously Carolina has stuck to that idea. They're very at the forefront of just wanting offense. They go with Dave Canales, but still not the norm, or at least not the most hirings in this cycle. So, yeah, it's just, like I said, it just comes back to being underwhelming. I don't think it's a bad hire. I just think it's a bit underwhelming given what things looked like. The last piece for me is, I do think with Josh Harris, you have this new owner syndrome, which is these guys come in, they want to win right away, especially you're building a new stadium, you're trying to restore the brand of the team. Maybe that scared off some of the younger coaches where they felt, look, this roster isn't any good. I do want to be winning by, year 2, year 3 perhaps, but is he going to go spend the most of anyone in free agency? Are we going to use the top 500 picks and is he going to think that I should be winning, going 500 or better in the first year, which again is always the goal, but maybe it's unrealistic. And I wonder how long Dan Quinn's leash is. Like if things are a disaster this year, is it just a one and done and Harris quickly pulls the trigger on a different direction?
The coaching staff thing that you brought up before is fascinating because if you look at Dan Quinn's staff, the last time he had the head coaching job, it was awesome. Part of that is because you had Kyle Shanahan, and then you essentially had the Shanahan tree, right, as part of this whole thing. Shanahan comes with his list of disciples. So it's a little bit like that Washington coaching staff in 2013, right, where look at all these guys that were on the same staffs because, they were all there with Shanahan. Most of them were still there in Atlanta when he was the head coach. They lost, I think, McVay at that point, but both LaFleur's were there. Mike McDaniel was there. But also on the defensive side, Jeff Ulbrich was there as well. Jeff Ulbrich is now the defense coordinator for the Jets, who have had a really good defense as well. So there's at least evidence that the last time he had this gig, he hired some really smart people. Even if you just isolated it to, hey, the man brought Shanahan in there on the offensive side, which is a pretty huge thing. That got an MVP season out of Matt Ryan. So it will be interesting to see what kind of pull Dan Quinn has to assemble this coaching staff and, if it can be a really good one. Because I feel like, we had Dan Quinn on the show quite a while ago now, but he sounded like somebody that had learned a lot of lessons from the first time around, right? It's not an easy gig at all, and you're not going to have the answers to some of these things until they happen, and if they happen against you, you're probably going to get fired. So I think there's definitely merit to guys getting a second shot at it if they demonstrate, look, we're a good head coach, or we're a good coach, period. We can hire, which, as we've talked about before, is one of the biggest things. Can you identify coordinators, position coaches, bring them in, hire a good staff, and then have answers to some of the things that went wrong the first time around?
And I think especially with how you failed the first time, there was no, from the rest of his staff or the front office or the players that he failed because he ostracized the building.
Right.
I'm kind of alluding to a Josh McDaniels here. He didn't fail because he was, not the most liked guy. I think he is one of the most liked guys around the entire NFL. Like you said, you just learn some lessons, you adjust, you get better. And I do want to say, you shouldn't always just hire a 35-year-old offensive coordinator. It's not that simple. So, yeah, I really don't think it's the worst hire in the world. There is certainly upside potential here. Again, with how the offensive staff shapes up, sounds like he might bring some guys, over from Dallas too. If he can get, Al Harris to join him as defensive coordinator instead of staying in Dallas, by all accounts, that would be a slam dunk defensive coordinator. I could be wrong, but I think he also had Raheem Morris in Atlanta for a stretch. So, we've listed a half dozen head coaches that were on his staff. So, yeah, clearly he knows what he's doing there. And from that point, it could be positive. It's just, we just thought this was the most attractive opening in the world, and they were going to get this awesome pairing with Ben Johnson and Drake May, Jaden Daniels, whatever. Not the case, but I don't think it's, it's not a bad hire in my eyes.
And it's also, we don't know, the reports have been everywhere with that Ben Johnson thing. We have no real idea whether they really wanted Ben Johnson and Ben Johnson didn't want the job, or they didn't want to go where he wanted in terms of finance or whatever, or simply Ben Johnson was just one guy that was on their list of people to talk through, and it never made it as far as, this is our candidate that we really want to zero in on. I mean, there is all kinds of propaganda being fired out from both sides of that in terms of the insider reports, so who knows what the dynamic there was. But if it is, they desperately wanted Ben Johnson, then obviously having to settle for your fallback guy is not ideal. If it wasn't, though, then it might have been the guy they wanted all along. It is just an against-the-grain type of hire. All right, our next sponsor, this podcast, is brought to you by the good people at Prize Picks. Eli has come up with a doozy, his Super Bowl Prize Picks lineup. We're going full send with this one. We've got 6 Prize Picks across the entire thing. Number 1, Patrick Mahomes. This feels like it should hit. He's going to get more than 0.5 passing yards. I feel like that's probably likely. Brandon Ayuk is going to get more than 62.5 receiving yards. Isaiah Pacheco going to get more than 0.5 rushing and receiving touchdowns, so he's going to score. Patrick Mahomes and Brock Purdy going for more than 38.5 rushing yards as a combo. Chris Jones getting more than 0.25 sacks, i.e. he's going to get on the score sheet as a sack, whether it's 1 or a half sack. And then Christian McCaffrey, and this is the big one, going for more than 90.5 rushing yards. All 6 of those things hit. You get the absolute jackpot, or you can have it as a flex play and still make some money, even if a few of them hit. I forget how many you can lose with your Prize Picks and still hit that thing. But anyway, Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America, the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can also play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz. You can find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you've got a player that exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. So go to prizepicks.com/PFFNFL and use code PFFNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/PFFNFL and use code PFFNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, Brad, we're getting towards free agency now. It's on the horizon. The first sort of significant period of team roster construction, rebuilding in the offseason. You've been all over it, obviously, at PFF.com. You've got your list of top free agents. But one of the things you've done recently is add potential landing spots for some of the top quarterbacks and wide receivers on that free agency list. And since those are the glamour positions, I suggest we dive into that and let people know where we think they're going to go. I guess the first and most obvious domino to fall in the quarterback market is Kirk Cousins. So where is Kirk Cousins going to land up?
Yeah, definitely. I think all other free agent quarterback decisions will wait until after Kirk Cousins lands. Even potentially some draft trades and things like that may get held up by, does Minnesota keep him and therefore they stick at 11, try to add more talent? Do they let him go? And then maybe they become one of the hot names as a trade-up candidate. So I'll say this. You try not to do full-on conspiracy theory, each offseason when things happen. But I've made this kind of analogy before where when Kevin Dotson went from Pittsburgh to the Los Angeles Rams, it probably should have raised our antennas a little bit that, maybe Sean McVay is going to change what he does on offense because philosophically, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense for an under center, wide zone, play action type approach to bring in this kind of big gap inside zone scheme player in Kevin Dotson. And sure enough, they changed their approach to the run game. So when Arthur Smith went to the Pittsburgh Steelers now, tying it back to Pittsburgh, look, can he change his philosophy? Sure. Can the Pittsburgh Steelers change their entire offense? Sure. But you look at the differences between what Arthur Smith has historically done and what the Steelers have done on offense the last couple of years, even just looking at the 3 years of Matt Canada and Arthur Smith, you're talking about like a team that is 56% of their runs are outside zone, the most in the NFL by 16%. The Steelers were 24th. You look at play action rate, the Falcons were second. The Steelers were, I think, dead last. Like I can name 10 more stats of just like schematically what they do, but even just personnel. The amount of 12 personnel in Atlanta was sky high. Pittsburgh wasn't that high. They did draft Darnell Washington, maybe want to do more of that, but to me, it just, Ryan Tannehill's the easier connection because of the Tennessee days with them too. But I also wonder if they sit there and say, look, we've gone 9-8, 10-7 a bunch of years in a row with, frankly, below replacement level quarterback play, below average, no question about it. And, Cam Hayward's going to be 35, I think, next year. TJ Watt's going to be 30. I'm sure he'll be good for several more years. But maybe they just say, you know what, let's just make a bit of a splash. Go get Kirk Cousins, and we think we can win a couple playoff games with, everything the same, but then you add in, a clear upgrade at quarterback. So I think Pittsburgh becomes fascinating there. He's a fit. And like I said, Arthur Smith can change. I'm not saying he can't, but what he does historically and what Kenny Pickett and this offense has done, not the same thing in any way, shape, or form. So that one jumps out there. And the Atlanta Falcons, where Arthur Smith comes from, of course, still makes a ton of sense in my eyes. You have, Raheem Morris bringing PFF Zach Robinson over. They can cater an offense around Kirk Cousins, no question. Their old coworker and Kevin O'Connell obviously loves him in Minnesota. Would probably have, rave things to say about him. And of course, they know what that offense looks like. So those two spots to me, if he doesn't stay in Minnesota, I think just jump up. You have Atlanta picking 8th. Pittsburgh's way down there, 20-something. So they don't have really a draft option. I think if he leaves, I think he goes to one of those two teams.
If you were handicapping it, what is the chances of Minnesota versus those teams? Like, how likely is it that he does leave? Because I would say when it was being talked about Bill Belichick going to Atlanta, I think Kirk would have dropped everything to work with Bill Belichick. Like, he would have loved that as a concept. That man wants to surround himself with the best at all times. He wants to pick the brains of those guys. You watch him on the Manning cast, it's like him interviewing them more than them interviewing him. Cousins just wants to be around those people to be the best quarterback that he could be. I think he would have taken less money, frankly, to go to Atlanta and work with Bill Belichick. Obviously, that's not the way they went. They went with Raheem Morris and then Zach Robinson coming in as the offense coordinator. I don't see that as attractive to Kirk Cousins. Like, I think it's like, yeah, I love Minnesota. It's great. I got the house here. I got the family here. But I would drop all of that in a heartbeat to go work with Bill Belichick, the greatest coach of all time. Would I drop it all in a heartbeat to go work with PFF Zach and Raheem Morris in Atlanta? Maybe. But they'd have to pony up some serious cash for that because the Vikings are probably going to pay me pretty well.
Yeah, true. And Kevin O'Connell and Wes Phillips, so a lot of connections there. So to me, here's how I look at it. I know Kevin O'Connell probably wants to bring him back. They probably say, look, we won 13 games the year before. He obviously started 0-4 this year, but they were clearly riding the ship and playing good football before Kirk Cousins unfortunately gets hurt. But I come back to they've done these, Band-Aid 1 year, 2 year extensions off of the original deal to always get out of ahead of the fact that they cannot tag him. He's virtually untaggable. And this year they made a conscious decision. We're going to let him enter a true contract year. 1 year, I think it was $35 million. You do that, so you take on that risk, and then gonna be 36-year-old Kirk Cousins tears his Achilles. Like, if that's not your exit valve to where you say, all right, we're going to pivot to the future. Justin Jefferson's about to be making $30+ million a year. We got to pay some, maybe Christian Darrisaw soon, maybe Danielle Hunter. Figure a lot of other things out. If we also still have the expensive quarterback, we're just sticking in purgatory. And I like Kirk Cousins. Like they'll be a playoff team, but I think it might be a battle between coaching staff and front office, frankly. But I just don't know why you would open the door to that, potential, and then you feel the need to spend because he has no tag, but like he has as much leverage over Minnesota as a free agent team, right? Like it's not like it's a different scenario. So I still probably would say Minnesota's like minus 120, whatever. Like I'd still make them the favorite, but not a heavy favorite by any means, because I read so much into the fact that they did not extend him before 2023.
Yeah, I forget where I saw it, but I think I saw somewhere saying that like he was asking for like a 2-year deal of like $95 million or something for the Vikings. So like a $45+ million a year deal for 2 years to tie him back down to Minnesota. I kind of feel like that makes sense for both sides. Like Cousins is always one of these, short, fully guaranteed deals that puts him back on the market and keeps his contract pace with, the higher paid guys. And from Minnesota's point of view, if you can't get the next guy, like if you can't work out a trade to get to 1 or 2 or whoever you like at the top of the draft, you're not going to do better than getting Cousins, even if it is giving him a decent chunk of money, and $45 million a year, it's not that much anymore. Like I kind of feel like that's a fair deal for both sides.
I would just say, so his first extension in 2020 was 2 years, 66. Did get a slight pay bump in 2022 to a 1 year, $35 million deal that he played on this past season. I think we have a little bit kind of ignored age sometimes because of the Tom Brady's of the world. Like I said, it's a 36-year-old, already not very mobile Kirk Cousins coming off a torn Achilles. So I wouldn't pay. If I'm Minnesota, again, like in different scenario, maybe I would. If I'm Minnesota, I'm just like, all right, we're giving him, again, like I said, I'm not saying it's a bad deal in a vacuum. Like he's worth more than, $5 million more than Daniel Jones. No one's arguing that. But the downside risk there to me is exorbitant, where maybe he struggles a little bit out of the gate because of health. He's already old, and you're guaranteeing at least 1.5, if not just the entire 2 years. You might sink the entire operation. And then you're just sitting there and it's like, all right, we're not going to be relevant at all until 2026. So I do hear what you're saying. Like there are certainly arguments in that favor as well. To me, I just say come back on a similar deal. My projection, I know it's too low, but I have 2 years, 60 with way less guarantees than he's ever had on a contract in recent years. That is more of the go back to Minnesota to try to kind of finish this thing out. And obviously he goes back and does he bangs the drum before the game with him and his son popping their tops off. And like, there's clearly a lot of love there, whenever your tarp's off in the stadium. But it's just a clean exit for me. So I don't know. We'll see. It's going to be fascinating. He's going to take the tour, I'm sure. Go get courted by a bunch of different suitors. And yeah, we know how quarterback works in this league. Someone's going to pony up and pay him a lot of money.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see where Minnesota are on this in terms of they really, really want him back and only turn to other options as a last resort, or like they would quite like him back, but actually they're focusing on moving up to the top of this draft, and Kirk Cousins is almost the fallback. Like they're in this weird position now where which is your priority? Do you want to push hard at getting Cousins back because he's good in this system and you've got receivers and this could be a really good offense, or do you want to say, look, we've been messing around with this Cousins thing for a while, we did put a stop date on it, this is the stop date, it's time to stop and go hard at something else. So one of the most interesting storylines, I think, of the offseason, you've got some wide receivers on this list. T. Higgins, obviously an upcoming free agent. Same kind of question. Is he in any danger of actually hitting the open market, or are they just going to give him the Jesse Bates treatment of you're getting franchise tagged and next year is when you get to say bye-bye?
Yeah, I think it's most likely that route. He gets the tag, no question about it. I do think there's a smaller chance that he is actually available via trade. A team that I didn't put on there that just popped in my head as we're talking, though, let's say you're the Arizona Cardinals. You have this extra pick from Houston. You thought it was going to be a top 10 pick. It's now the 27th pick in the draft. And so, let's just go get Kyler Murray, a big body number one target. We'll offer them the 27th overall pick and, throw in a third, whatever. Cincinnati, again, I expect them to just tag him, make him play on it, see what happens. I really would be surprised if an extension gets done here just because he missed time. So it's not like he boosted his stock this past year. He is healthy right now and played well down the stretch with Jake Browning. But, yeah, he's the one, though, I would say more than Michael Pittman. Like, I think both get tagged, but I think Pittman just signs an extension. T is going to get tagged, and I would be shocked if the two sides come even close to an extension. And unlike a Bates, maybe he just causes so much of a fuss that they say, you know what, for the right price, I think around an A.J. Brown, which was a first and a third, I think it was 20 or 18 for Traylon Burks and 100, maybe something like that. Let's mirror that market and just do that. And then if you're Cincinnati, you take a receiver with that 27th overall pick. We know there's a ton of great talent there in the draft, so maybe it's a 1-for-1 replacement. But yeah, that's how I see that going down.
That's a sort of fascinating draft spot for that conversation as well, because you're right. Number one, this draft, I think, is particularly well stocked of massive bodied receivers. Like last year, the sort of trend of the receivers was they're all tiny. Like all these guys that look like Tank Dell was where you were looking at the bottom of the first, the second, and the third round. Now, when you get to the bottom of the first, all the guys around seem to be giants. You're talking about, Xavier Legette or Keon Coleman or, Donnie Mitchell from Texas. All these like 6'3", 6'4", 6'2", apparently in Legette's case. No, 6'1", right? He was even smaller.
6'1".
Anyway, like 210, 220-pound bodied guys. And like the ceiling for them is probably T. Higgins. Like, the best you're going to get out of a guy like that, if you're lucky, is probably T. Higgins. Maybe one of them becomes a better receiver than that, but that's probably the best you can expect. But obviously T. Higgins is due the next contract, whereas those guys are going to come in on the fresh rookie deal. So it's like, how much do you value that contract effectively is the conversation you're having when you're making that, the certainty of T. Higgins actually being T. Higgins, and one of those guys maybe can be T. Higgins versus rookie contract versus veteran contract. It's a really interesting, team building kind of hypothetical that might actually play out.
And the Bengals, to me, deserve credit. They've shown a lot of the tendencies and traits that these sustained winners tend to do. Like in their free agency moves, when they had the incredible haul of, Chidobe Awuzie, Trey Hendrickson, Mike Hilton, all those guys, it was the second wave. They didn't make a big splash early on. They've let some talented players leave. You lose a Von Bell and kind of have question marks in the secondary at safety. Obviously you use some draft capital there, but they've done a lot of that, letting players go and trying to replenish it via the draft. The next step is you make these tough decisions. I know Joe Burrow wouldn't be happy. I know Jamar Chase wouldn't be happy. The fans wouldn't be happy. I get that. But if you want this team to be a contender for the next 10 years, you're talking about, look at Marquise Brown gets traded from the Baltimore Ravens to the Arizona Cardinals. You drop in Tyler Linderbaum, who's already, one of the, 5, 6, 7 best centers in the entire NFL. And obviously we're talking adding a premium position here, not a center. That's what the sustained elite teams do. You've already paid Joe Burrow top of market. You've given him, $200 more guaranteed dollars than any other player in the last decade. You got to start doing stuff like this. As much as it sets you back in the short term, it's how you sustain the long term.
All right, so you have a bunch more wide receivers on this list. I'm going to list out some names, and then you give me a shout for which one you actually want to focus on the most. Michael Pittman Jr. from Indianapolis, obviously a free agent. Mike Evans, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, great. The wide receiver version of Curtis Martin, as we discussed previously on this show. Marquise Brown, who you just mentioned, from the Arizona Cardinals. Calvin Ridley from the Jags after his season. And then let's cut it off at Darnell Mooney for the Bears and Gabriel Davis for the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, so good cluster here. So first, I'll start with Mike Evans. He had an interesting quote. He was at the Houston Rockets game, I want to say, a couple nights ago, and some reporter asked him, about his upcoming offseason. He was like, I'm excited to see where I go. So, he is viewed as this guy who's always Tampa, and I think he is. He talked about taking a pay cut in the middle of the Tom Brady era when he was already probably one of the most underpaid receivers in the NFL. And last offseason, he expressed his frustration. Him and his agent were, in the media saying we wanted to get a deal done. We're frustrated it didn't happen. We'll see how the year goes, and then maybe we'll bounce. So to me, he's interesting. Where I think he could go the cash out big route, maybe follow Dave Canales to Carolina. Hypothetically, they'll probably pay him as much as he's as much as he asks for. Or does he stick with the Tom Brady approach, go to like a New York Jets and be the big physical X, alongside the kind of move versatile Z and Garrett Wilson and pair up with Aaron Rodgers. So he's fascinating to me. The other one I want to jump to is Calvin Ridley, where I originally on our free agency big board, it was week 13. I wasn't trying to be lazy here. I understand how the rules work, but I put a tag down for Josh Allen and Calvin Ridley. It's kind of me just punting the decision of how I was going to project one or the other. Trent Baalke, the GM, came out and basically said, we're going to tag Josh Allen. They haven't talked yet. If you're between the two, it's not even a discussion. Josh Allen was a top 5 edge rusher, maybe top 10 edge rusher in the NFL this year. And Calvin Ridley is a 29-year-old receiver. That was good, and I think did get much better at the end of the season, but he's going to hit the market. So Ridley's fascinating to me. I think he's now more of your move guy. You got to create some free releases. He struggled against press this year and creating separation against man coverage, which he was great at in Atlanta. Maybe that comes back, but Chicago is interesting to me. You pair him with the DJ Moore. I put Kansas City on here because he kind of is that Kansas City type receiver. Look, he definitely wants to get paid to a degree. I mean, he's still looking for his first veteran contract at 29. But yeah, he's going to hit the market now. And, obviously Jacksonville trusted him. They traded for him mid-suspension. I'm sure he'd like to figure something out there. But, I mean, that team is kind of in turmoil right now. You got the GM throwing the coaching staff under the bus in his end-of-season press conference. Ridley, to me, is a really, really interesting piece because the floor is really high, which you can't say a lot about a free agent wide receivers.
Be a phenomenal combination with that Kansas City offense as well because he'd fit right in with a receiving core that's letting down the quarterback on a consistent basis. It's a perfect match.
Yeah, his drops came down. But yeah, they were sky high.
They did.
Probably led the league through week 9, but they definitely came down. But it's not a bad shot. And we'll throw the last one in there for Darnell Mooney. Also have Kansas City on here, in part the connection to Matt Nagy, who obviously drafted him in Chicago, had a 1,000-yard season as a second-year player there, with 2021 quarterbacks being Andy Dalton and Justin Fields. So, they've had the fewest passing yards in the entire NFL since Mooney joined the team, and the Chiefs, shockingly, have had the most. So this, to me, I think there is going to be one receiver we get who follows the Juju Smith-Schuster path of, I'll get some decent middling offers, but I could take a one-year flyer from the Chiefs with, chock full of incentives. For people to forget, Juju had a one-year, $3.76 million one-year flyer. He left Kansas City with $10.5 million because of, all the playoff success and then some individual success. So to me, I also think Darnell Mooney's a great fit. He creates separation at the intermediate level. Had a down year this year with the contested catch stuff and things like that. I think there's going to be variance there and positive regression. We've seen him make plays in traffic and make some snags over top of defenders before. He was just hurt and just had a bad year. But if I'm him, go to Kansas City, sign a one-year flyer, put up a monster year with Patrick Mahomes, and hopefully someone else pays you to be there, number 2, number 3, but on a good, mid-tier market deal.
Jumping back to quarterbacks for a second, you got Baker Mayfield on this list. You've got Ryan Tannehill. Baker Mayfield, I assume, is going to re-up in Tampa Bay. It's just a case of what that cost them. But Tannehill is maybe more intriguing to me. What does his market look like?
I think you're looking at the Andy Dalton market. He signed 2 years, $10 million last year, coming off a good season with the New Orleans Saints. Tannehill, also Pittsburgh. If they're gonna kind of go the cheaper bridge and kind of competition for Kenny Pickett, obviously Ryan Tannehill would make all the sense in the world. So yeah, I think that's where I see that. I put Denver on there. They do have Jarrett Stidham, so maybe they feel they already have that guy, but I think they're going to take the risk of not having a guy they trust and think they can build an offense around. But yeah, he's fascinating. The Baker story too, I think the hiring of Liam Cohen this morning by the Buccaneers as their offensive coordinator is a bit of a tell. He was with the Rams last year when Baker came in and obviously had, that great game. I think it was against the Raiders where he kind of went off and won a game for them. So that to me is a bit of a signal. I think they are going to want to get that done. They're obviously picking very late in the draft. The report's already coming out. He's looking for $45 million. I mean, he had a better year than Daniel Jones did last year, but I don't know. We'll see. I think it falls more in 30, 35 than 45. But yeah, he had a good season.
That Daniel Jones contract, every single GM up talking about re-upping a quarterback is getting that thrown in their face in these negotiations already. Forget where they end up, but that's the starting point, right? Is the GM's got his price, the agent's got his price, and the first counter is going to be, look at this Daniel Jones contract. My guy's way better than that tool. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I love there were some Packers fans, talking about like maybe Jordan Love takes a similar deal. It's like, fellas, I think Jordan Love had more touchdown passes this year than Daniel Jones had the 2 years combined prior to signing his extension. So, good luck with that. I don't think it's going to be the case. He wasn't perfect this year, but the second half of the season, he may have been the best quarterback in football. So, yeah, no, I think his deal starts with a 5, not a 4. But yeah, that Jones contract is not helping teams, no question about it.
And Baker, somebody needs to keep track now of like what he gets to in terms of totality of offensive changes, system changes he's had in his career. Because I know he had the record for like the most in a 4 or 5 year period to start his career. It's not like it's slowing down anytime soon. Like the man loses coordinator every single season, if not multiple within the year. He's going to hit the record at some point if that keeps going. Like I assume somebody like Josh McCown or somebody like that, Ryan Fitzpatrick, has the total record for number of offensive systems they've been in through just the volume of teams they played at. But, dude, Baker's got to be chasing that down the longer his career goes on at this rate.
He really is on a historic path there. I think it's like every year of his career. Even when he was at the same team for 4 years in Cleveland, I think he had a different offensive play caller every single year. So, yeah, that is it's a good shout. Alex Van Pelt was his coach for that who we forget about when they won that playoff game against Pittsburgh, and Alex Van Pelt was the acting head coach because what's his name? Stefanski was at home, watching on TV, with COVID in his basement. He's now the New England OC, so maybe pair him with a young pick quarterback. But yes, tangent aside, Baker Mayfield, feel bad for the guy. Maybe some continuity would have helped him out, and he would still be in Cleveland if they could have just kept an OC for more than 1 year.
And then obviously we've saved the best for last. We got to wrap this up with Pro Bowl quarterback Gardner Minshew. What does Gardner Minshew's market look like after this Pro Bowl season that he had filling in for Anthony Richardson?
Yeah, I think we are going to see a bit of a boon for the backup quarterback market. There were just so many guys that played this year in the backup spot, and you either had a guy like Gardner who's playing in a de facto playoff game in Week 18, or you were another team cycling through backups and trying to figure things out, and it was a bit of a disaster. So I actually project him a pretty strong deal. It's 2 years, $17.5 million, so $8.75 per year. It's kind of a cap-adjusted Taylor Heineke type deal. I think Heineke maybe just got a big contract because clearly Atlanta, obviously had some question marks going into the season about Desmond Ridder. But if there's a team like that either is taking a rookie, obviously why Gardner went to the Indianapolis Colts in the first place with Anthony Richardson, or they have, let's say Washington punts on, taking a QB at 2 for whatever reason and gives Sam Howell another shot. But then you bring in, a Gardner. So, yeah, I think he's interesting. I think he's going to have a market. He clearly is a high floor player. The ceiling is not that high, but I think he makes sense in a bunch of spots. I put down the Giants here, which again, I think for him, from Gardner's perspective, maybe you start the first month of the season, hypothetically, as Daniel Jones recovers from the torn ACL. You get some runway there. If he gets hurt, you get to keep playing and continue to put good football on tape. But yeah, I think he's going to have a decent market. It's hard because there's only so many, musical chairs available, but that upper tier backup QB, I think, is going to have a nice offseason overall.
All right, the last thing to tell you about before we get into the Boo Boo Breakdown is it's all draft and free agency from this point on. If you are already there drafting to your heart's content on the PFF Mock Draft Sim, we have a promo code for you guys. 30MDS, 30MDS gets you 30% off an annual PFF subscription. Draft for your favorite team with PFF's Mock Draft Simulator, or frankly, draft for all the damn teams. Go select all of it, tinker with the controls, figure out what the draft is going to do, and spend your time mock drafting. We've got some emails in already, nflpodcast@pff.com, people sending us their awesome mock drafts that they've created. But get in there on the action, get 30% off, 30MDS. And now let's head over to the final Boo Boo Breakdown of the season. Thank you very much, Bradley.
Thank you.
All right, welcome into the very last Boo Boo Breakdown of the NFL season with our guy Vic Troha. We're going to go an early preview of the Super Bowl. We'll be previewing the game as well, not tomorrow, Monday morning for all of you listeners or viewers. But let's talk about the game, Vic.
Yeah, well, entering in technically week 22, and we might have one of the lightest injury reports of the season, so figure that math out for me.
Well, it helps when there's only 2 teams left. Yeah.
So, coming into today, it's been interesting because what we're going to pretty much cover is more of a recovery for a lot of these players. A couple big names that might be out, but a lot of what we saw carry over from last week, and just seeing how these players are going to deal with some of their injuries.
Yeah, so obviously the big difference between this and most other games is you get the extra week of rest and recovery. Let's first of all cover any loss from the championship games, the most obvious of which was Charles Omenihu tearing his ACL during that game. Obviously brutal for him, losing his chance at a Super Bowl one game before it happens. But what is the story with an ACL injury this late in the season? So, very late January, basically as late as you could possibly do it. What does that mean for him next season?
Yeah, starting off rehab as soon as that swelling goes down and surgery's done. But unfortunately, when you have an ACL tear late in the season or any type of significant injury like this, you aren't really targeting week one. You're targeting just getting back at the beginning of the season at some point whenever his recovery is full. For Omenihu, from what I've seen so far, just an ACL, give it about 9 months post-surgery. It's just unfortunate the timing of it. Obviously, he wants to be there for the Super Bowl, but if you're going to tear your ACL, do it with a strip sack, right? So he's going to have an off season of recovery, not a lot of physical training as far as getting stronger and stuff like that, but just more rehab.
And is that still the timetable for, let's say, a routine quote-unquote ACL injury with nothing else associated with it, just the ACL tear? Because we've seen guys now sort of recover from those in 6 months and be back in the field. Like, if there's nothing complicating that, are you still looking at this and saying, 9 months is the timetable, so we're not looking at week one? Or are you saying, look, if everything goes well, there's no reason we can't be back for the start of the regular season?
Yeah, 9 months is that arbitrary number because you do have those people who are just either freak athletes or make that miraculous recovery and come back earlier, but you can't just try to categorize somebody into that spectrum of like a 6 to 7 month window when they very well could take 9 or 10 months. And 9 or 10 months is not what we say, like, okay, well, you're going to come back and be able to practice. Like 9 or 10 months, we expect you to be on the field as far as like the NFL caliber players.
Okay, let's look at the Chiefs' injuries for the actual game. Joe Thuney obviously was one of the biggest ones in the AFC Championship game, all-pro caliber left guard. It's a big loss when he's not out there. Is he going to be back out there with the extra week of rest?
So it's very interesting because as of now, they aren't giving us any more information about what Thuney's injury really is. Now, they're calling it a pec strain. But to kind of put that in perspective, a pec strain can be in the muscle, at the muscle tendon junction, or at the tendon bone junction. And if he has tears outside of the muscle, there's what we call less vascularity, less blood flow, which is delayed healing. If he is just dealing with a little bit of strain, pain is going to be his guide, and I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to push it through and play. But if he's not healing that well, and if it's a little bit more severe than what the MRI is leading, then he very well could not play. Now, luckily, they didn't really show a big drop-off from his absence, but it's going to be one of those that, like, mid-next week, we're going to get a really good idea based off of his practice report and how he's doing. But as of now, if the game was coming up this weekend, I would not expect him to play. But that extra week is actually very important for him as far as a soft tissue recovery.
And that's the other element involved in all this, right, is that it's the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
If we're even remotely marginal, certainly the player is going to be pushing to play, and probably the team is going to be trying to get them to play as well. Even if maybe in a given week, certainly a regular season week 8 game, there wouldn't be.
Yep, and they're going to definitely try, as far as like right now in this window still, to keep him involved in all of the game reports and planning. But then when it comes to next week, when he's actually going full go on practice, that's when we're going to get a better idea when he's testing out that pec to see if it can withstand some of the forces. Because as you know, an interior offensive lineman like that, he has to use his chest a lot. So we'll see what ends up happening.
Isaiah Pacheco obviously had that foot and toe injury. They had him obviously playing in the AFC Championship game. I believe they were saying he had something fitted to his shoe, his cleat, to try and kind of lessen the impact there. Is 2 weeks going to clean him up?
Yeah, he'll pretty much be full go, easy to recover from that just based off what he looked like last game. Now, if you would have asked that question and he hobbled off to the sideline a couple times, yeah, we'd have a little bit different perspective there. But going into the Super Bowl week, he should be fine. I'm sure that they're going to do precautionary measures, like maybe also continue to use that insert in his shoe. But other than that, I wouldn't have any concern with him coming back and playing full go.
Anyone else on the Chiefs you want to cover before we bounce to the 49ers?
Yeah, so one of the big things that, as far as like just with the Chiefs in general, is they have multiple injuries that have happened over the playoffs. Like we were talking about Pacheco, Tooney, Amenahue, all of that. But overall, they have been one of the healthiest teams through this playoff run. And I think that is so important when you look at a team and their success rate, because you're going into each practice report, and I don't know if you heard Andy Reid come out. I mean, it was the shortest injury report I've heard all year. It may have been 25 seconds.
Right.
And he was, Tooney's maybe, Amenahue's out, that's it. So when you're looking at that going into, a Super Bowl, I think they're a step ahead of the game just as far as the luck that they've had without the injuries.
49ers, I think obviously the biggest one is Deebo Samuel and his shoulder.
Yep.
He played in the NFC title game, didn't necessarily have the biggest game we've ever seen from him. There were a couple of snaps there where it sort of looked like he was maybe favoring that shoulder and wasn't trying to launch it into people the way he normally does. But then there's some other plays where he certainly took a big shot or, went to ground hard. So it, maybe it limited him, but it didn't shut him down. It didn't sort of take him out of the game, and it didn't limit him to just a decoy role. How much is 2 weeks going to do for him?
Yeah, we'd kind of discussed that, like how would he play more of that decoy role? They did get him involved.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is the right term, but like I truly think he may have dodged a bullet. Like they were very easily, based off of how much they involved him, that he could have landed on that shoulder, that left shoulder, and had another, inflammation of his AC joint or whatever that impact would have caused. I think he's going to be fine. He's going to go into the Super Bowl. He's going to go all out. I think that he's going to be very involved in the game plan. And who knows, if he does have some aggravation in that shoulder, between the adrenaline and the time off, and if they need to give him an injection, he's going to be good to go.
Yeah, I mean, he played 51 snaps in that NFC Championship game, which was the second most of any sort of skill position player that isn't, the quarterback and the offensive line to play every single snap. So they didn't scale down his workload that much. Maybe he didn't have as many kind of targets or carries than he would have had if he was 100% healthy. But it's not like they were, easing him back, protecting him, not, giving him just sort of specific packages or whatever. They pretty much put him out there as a full go and said, let's see what happens here.
Yep, absolutely.
Who else do we need to talk about for the 49ers?
Yeah, so Christian McCaffrey, I don't know if you saw that still shot of him when he was getting tackled, but his neck was pretty much wrenched to the side. Looked like initially what they would consider like a stinger, which is when you just kind of get that shooting nerve pain down your arm and maybe like a little bit of a muscle strain on his neck muscle. He goes out, Mitchell scores a touchdown. McCaffrey comes out and later reports like he was just worried that he wouldn't be able to grip the ball tight enough. And I'm looking at him like, you were exhausted. You just ran 15 yards through the defense. He was pretty tired coming out. At the end of the game, reports no issues. As today stands, McCaffrey's probably just sore with some of his neck muscles, and that's about it. He's going to be good to go. He had that stinger just kind of like Greenlaw had, comes back in, plays through it. I would not worry about either of them having any issues coming into the Super Bowl week.
Yeah, McCaffrey's a guy that it feels like the extra week is huge for. I mean, he had the calf strain before the playoff run. He's now had the stinger. Like, he's just been beat up the last few weeks. Yeah. I imagine the extra week for him is awesome.
If I were to put like an importance on this extra week for any player, number one would probably be Tooney. Number two would be McCaffrey. And especially just because of how physical he is,
right.
His body needs that. Now, a little bit off that, like, people ask, well, what do you do when you have this week off? Are like you completely shutting down? This is a lot of active rest for these players, not rest. So what I mean by that is like they're still moving, they're running through drills, they're doing mobility exercises, getting their therapy. They're not just like sitting on the couch, because your body will actually tend to stiffen up and go into pure relaxation mode. So he's going to be moving and stuff like that. But this week for him is so important that he just kind of gets all of his soft tissue issues taken care of.
Anyone else from the 49ers before we wrap it up?
Just watch out for Kittle. You probably saw that he had like a little bit of a toe issue and was hobbling in the game, but obviously he was good enough to come back in, especially for the last play of the hands team. He's going to be fine, but I wouldn't be surprised if like they limit him in practice, just more for rest, so he doesn't have any aggravation of his toe.
All right, that'll do it for the Boo Boo Breakdown for this week, for the Super Bowl, and of course for the entire season. So a huge thank you to our guy Vic Troha for coming in and enlightening us all on injuries on the entire process. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed listening to it. That's it for the PFF NFL podcast this week. Myself and Steve will be back on Monday previewing the big game, as you're contractually obliged to say. But that's it for the week. Hope you've enjoyed listening. Talk to you later.